I think we're going to move on. Two psychotherapists have sex. One says, "That was good for you. How was it for me?" It's always good to get it's a very old joke actually, it's always good to get a psychotherapeutic angle on things. We've had the kind of behavioural economics. Our next speaker is Julie Hay, who is Chief Executive of a training consultancy called Psychological Intelligence. Quite a lot of what we're talking about comes down to that psychological intelligence. She's an internationally accredited trainer in neuro-linguistic programming and in transactional analysis. She has more decades of experience, managerial and consulting across sectors than I would care to mention, but financial services, engineering, advertising, all sorts of clients. So, Julie, I'm going to ask you to present next. Thank you.
Good morning. I was just thinking when I heard the introduction that perhaps I should explain that my main experience of being a psychotherapist has been with people in prison. So you might feel that that might be quite useful. It was a high security male prison, so lots about violence and wanting to kill people. And I suspect that sometimes that might be the emotion that comes up for some of you about your partners in the business. Also, although this bit's called exploration, I'm very tempted to just do a little bit of provocation, because I kept seeing these comments about clients get the agencies they deserve. But it occurs to me that agencies get the clients they deserve as well. And I'm aware that there's quite an imbalance here today in that a lot of you are agencies rather than clients. And it reminds me of when I do teaching for managers in organisations, they'll always come out with a comment that, oh, well, I would manage my subordinates differently, but they're so hard and they don't appreciate it when I'm nice to them. And I have to remind them that that's exactly what their subordinates say about the managers as well. And the whole thing is about, well, somebody has to start it off differently. It's no good keep saying we haven't got a good relationship, because it comes down to who's got the most skill. So what I'm going to be doing actually is looking at what's the elephant up to, using the idea of the rider. I'm going to be saying, well, what's going on inside the elephant? We had iceberg, but when I listened to that, I thought we could have just had looking into the elephant. Doesn't quite work as a metaphor, but that page is just because when they booked me, they said they wanted me to put something up that showed you who I've worked with and established some credibility. So I'm not going to spend long on that one. You've got it on the IPA. I've worked with a lot of organisations, and I know people get upset sometimes when I say, actually, your issues are no different to any other industries. You're all people, and people only do so many different things. If you look around, they all do the same few patterns. And basically, that's what I'm going to be talking about. So, just for those of you who like to have a structure, I'm going to talk about recognition patterns and attitudes, then personal styles and working styles. I'm then going to bring the personal styles, working styles, and some of the recognition patterns into something where I put it all into a little package about relationship. And then I'm going to talk about contracting, making agreements for win-win, and then a final piece on managing change, because hopefully after you've listened to me, you're going to want to make some changes to how you behave with some people. 3 points. Donkey bridges. Donkey bridges is the word that trainers use for all those gimmicks that we use to help you remember things, like starting things with the same letter. I like them. Some people hate them. While you listen to me, misery is optional. Just change the words. If you don't like the fact they all start with the same letters, put some other words in. I won't mind. The other thing is, I actually plan to cover quite a few different ideas. I'm planning to talk as fast as I can. I don't expect you to go, oh, I love all of them. Just listen, and then some will grab you, some won't. That's normal. Maybe there'll be some now and some later on. And while we're talking about that, my understanding is that you can make notes against my slides on your iPads, which I hope is true, because they wouldn't let me give you out sheets of paper to write on. They said, oh, no, we're much too, technologically advanced for that. So I'm hoping you can do that if you want to. You do learn more if you get kinesthetically involved with it, and writing works. And if you do, I'm hoping that they find some way of sending it to you. Now I know that you can't just email that to yourselves from those iPads. And the final thing is a hey health warning, just making fun with my name. And that is that I'm going to simplify a lot of things. That means I put people into boxes. You can't really put people into boxes, but when they get stressed, they often climb into them. So it's quite useful then to have a simple model that says what might be going on, as long as you use it carefully and you don't get locked into, well, I've already analysed that person and they were this type, and why are they acting like that then? And they shouldn't be doing that. So that's just the warning about how you use this needs a bit of subtlety, because, yeah, you can fix us into some boxes, but then we will persist in being individual as well. Okay, first thing then, what I often think of as the secret of the universe is the notion of strokes. Anyone heard of that idea before as a unit of recognition? Couple of you. Oh, okay, good. What you can do is lift off this and think what you get from it this time that was different from what you know already. For the rest of you, it's a jargon term from transaction analysis, means a unit of recognition. It was originally based on the idea of stroking, so there is the physical thing, and we do know how important that can be. But actually, it's now used for anything that demonstrates that somebody is aware of the existence of another human being. So that might just be catching their eye. So as I glance at some of you and look a bit longer, that's a stroke. So this gets to be more of a stroke, and then you have to, you give me one back because you start to smile, So just a glance is a little low one, but then if it becomes more than that, it becomes a more significant one. And they're actually a biological necessity. We don't actually survive without human contact. Some people can manage to be like hermits, but even them, as babies, had to have other people around. And it's why people find it so difficult in solitary confinement. And, you read the stories of what happened with the hostages in the Middle East and things like that. And why people start to relate to the people who've kidnapped them instead of back to normality. One quick way of thinking about them is positive or negative. Basically, do they invite the person to feel good and okay about themselves and other people or not? 2 quick comments on that, because it's very easy to simplify that too much. It doesn't mean you can only say nice things to people from now on. Constructive criticism is a positive stroke, because it says, I think you're okay, I'm going to give you some feedback, and I believe that you can use it. Praise by comparison is usually a negative stroke. So if you say to somebody, you're so good at this, I wish other people were as good as you, they might feel nice, but it invites them into one-up. So it's not as simple as nice, nasty. It is, what's the impact on them about how they feel about themselves and other people? Also, verbal, visual, or touch. Verbal's quite common, of course, in the working life. And just a point there that chatting at the coffee machine or the water cooler, the strokes are normally nowhere near as powerful as they are if you're in a meeting. Because at the coffee machine, you maybe talk about what was on telly last night. In a meeting, you get much more engaged. There's often much more real feeling going into it as well. And so you look at the intensity. And sometimes people who are in jobs where they love it, which I'm assuming all of you are, don't realise that people who are in jobs where you just come to work every day need to stand at the coffee machine and chat, because that's how they're getting their strokes. And also, if you work in any of those companies that say you don't go over and give people their messages when they come in, you send them by email, you're running right across human nature. The visual, we look at people, we smile. I got a smile when I did the eye contact, or we scowl. Sometimes we don't mean to scowl, we're busy, someone interrupts us and we look up with a sort of, and they think that was deliberately targeted at them. But also visual would be you walk towards someone, or you actually see them coming and you quickly walk away and your back sends the message. And then touch. Touch is really significant. We've got all sorts of cultural problems around touch, of course, in our culture. You probably know that if you go to United Nations meetings, you can spot the Brits easily because they're the ones walking backwards while all the others try and get closer. There's all sorts of weird research being done about, in a library, they did an experiment where they apparently accidentally touched half the people's hands as they gave them the book. Afterwards, when they were interviewed, and this relates back to what you were saying, the ones who'd been touched didn't know they'd been touched. They had a check question to make sure they weren't going, ew, they touched me or anything. But they made far more positive comments about the staff and the lighting in the library and how good the book collection was. And so it wasn't just they thought the people were nice, it was weird, really, but that's what happens. When I run training programs, I probably shouldn't say this in case I need to use it later with any of you, but when I run training programs and I get a difficult participant, I will make sure I find a way of touching them in a way that they won't notice, of course. So don't set that one up for, let's see what we can get her to do. I'll sort of, yes, maybe. I would just move behind them or something and say, don't move back, I've got a coffee, or something. But people then get nicer. And it's why handshakes are important in our culture. And it's also why, I guess it doesn't happen now, but in my early days, I am quite old, women used to get so upset because men wouldn't shake hands with them. And you would think that's totally illogical. Why would you want to? Why would you want this sweaty gorilla leaving all that on your nice, clean hand? But of course, what they knew psychologically was it's a stroke. It means something. They're not recognising your existence in the way that they should. Stroking patterns. This is where it gets more interesting when you start talking about 3 years and 7 years and changing agencies and so on. We all develop our own stroking patterns. They take time so that we end up with a group of people that we have regular contact with, and we know the kind of strokes that get exchanged. They know what we're like, they know what we're interested in, what turns us on. We know that about them. When we go through change, this all gets disrupted because you're not seeing the same people anymore, so it makes it even more stressful. And also, we filter it through the attitudes we've got. What I've also added there is this is what happens when you change an agency. So the typical situation that I saw on some of the queries people sent in advance was their client changes, the new manager comes in, they've got their own agency that they used in their old company, they'd like them. The reason they want that is nothing to do with how good they are at being creative and so on. It's because they've got their stroking patterns already set up. It's just the same as anybody else changing their job and finding it takes a while to get to know the new people. And the big risk is that in that process, they don't wait long enough, of course, and they're already trying to get you out that was there before because your stroking patterns were with the person in their job before them. If you can find a quick way of getting on their stroking wavelength, you've got more chance of surviving. The attitudes. Very simple one. Some of you may have come across this idea before, I'm okay, you're okay. It was a bestseller in the 60s, which actually didn't do it any favours because then all the psychologists all said, oh, well, that's popular stuff, we don't bother with that. But basically, the idea here is that as we're growing up, we all pick up different views of the world. And we know what all of these are like, to think I'm okay and other people are, and I am and they're not. But by the time we've grown up, we're usually majoring on one of these, and it may not be the I'm okay, you're okay. And we filter our strokes through it. So if we're I'm okay, you're not, then anyone who tells us we're doing a good job, we're just like, well, of course I am. And I'm amazed a worm like you would notice it. If we're I'm not and you are, and they give us a stroke about what we've done well, we say, yeah, but it wasn't only me, you know, somebody else helped me. And if we're I'm not okay, you're not okay, it's like, okay, so why are you being nice to me? You're after something, aren't you? Yeah. So the strokes get filtered. So again, if you pick up this as an idea and you start giving out nice positive strokes, don't be surprised if people then react in a rather strange manner because they're looking through the wrong window. Their attitude's filtering it out. Okay, so that's the recognition patterns and the attitudes bit. Next thing, personal styles. This is just a quick look at how we come across. And people are like radio sets. So we're like a radio. We've got little arms and legs and we move around. And here's where I could make the rude joke, of course, that some of us have got our tuning dial is sort of rusted in place. We never change. We're always on the same channel. Others of us, though, flick between different channels. And, you know, if you're an opera fan and you come into somebody and they were a radio and they were playing the latest pop music, you probably think, ouch, you know, they call that music. And the same thing happens with our personal styles. So that, for example, if you listen to Evan on the radio, if you like that, you might not then like one of the other channels where somebody's either talking quite differently or there's some great big drama playing out or some soap opera type of thing. And we can think about our own behaviour in that way. So, first couple of ones that we develop, from when we're born, we arrive with a natural child way of behaving. Fortunately, it isn't only crying, otherwise the grown-ups would get fed up with us before we grew up. But that includes anything we do naturally as children. So we're happy, we're curious, we want to explore. Also, we get angry. Little kids get angry. What happens is the grown-ups realise, though, that they need to help us develop some alternatives, because if we carried on like that, we're not going to survive in life. Like, if you get angry as a little kid, and then you go to work and the computer won't work and you kick it, they give you the sack. You have to learn something other than just showing how you really feel. So we develop what we call an adapted child, which is about fitting in. Very much cultural as well. We do the things in the culture, including the family. I can still remember going to a boyfriend's house when I was young, and they said, make yourself at home. And on the way home on the bus, he said, well, you've blown that. What did I do? He said, well, you took your shoes off. We walked around in bare feet. And I'm like, well, none of you had shoes on either. And I mean, I was a teenager. I never walked around with shoes on if I could avoid it. He said, yes, but we all had our slippers on. So even between what are apparently very similar cultural families, you can get this one wrong. Next, we copy. So we develop two more of these ways of behaving. Nurturing parent, which I've deliberately shown as a male because although these tend to get the usual stereotypes, they don't have to. So nurturing is anything you do about caring for others. Controlling is being in charge of them. And again, the female stereotype, it's a bit like, you know, they say horses sweat, men perspire, ladies glow with health. Well, this is a bit like that men can sound off and they're just angry. Women are awful if they do exactly the same behaviour, and vice versa. If the man is nurturing, well, he's a pushover, isn't he? So it doesn't have to be like that, but that's what we tend to do. And then the final one, functional adult, is the bit being like a computer, being logical, thinking things out. If we then look at how those are useful, then controlling parent is the way you want to come across if you need to be firm. So if you did want to tell your partner organisation that that's not included in the contract, you might need to use a controlling parent if they won't get to it through logic. Nurturing parent is for being encouraging. So if somebody's maybe going to do their first presentation or something, you might say, oh, it'll be great. Functional adult is great for problem solving because you're talking rationally. Adapted child when you need to be courteous and polite and fit in. A natural child for being friendly. I would also say for being creative. And I would anticipate that in your business, there's a lot of natural child needs to be there. The thing about that, of course, is that in order to do that, you need other natural child people or you need some nurturing parent people. It doesn't work. For example, I've heard the mentions about procurement. Well, if they tend to be more controlling parent or functional adult and you go in like a natural child, they just think you're just not with it, and it won't work. Now, we can do all of these, we just don't always bother. So part of this is about you having to use the skill to switch your wavelength to suit what the other person is doing. Now, another one, which might seem a bit odd because this is another set of 5, but I will link them all back together in a minute. This is our working styles. These are things that are seen as our strengths, but they're problems when we overdo them. They actually come from a psychotherapeutic model where they were originally identified as people's drivers that got them into trouble. They're like our obsessional ways of behaving. And of course, because they're like that, when we get stressed, we act obsessionally and then we get more stressed, so it just gets worse and worse. And that was the drivers. But when I started looking at this, it struck me that actually when you look in organisations, these are people's strengths. So the trick is to know what's happening. It's to know, be the driver in another sense, be the rider on the elephant, and know that my elephant's trying to go off into this stress reaction and I need to stop it, and this is how I do it, and then I get a strength. Now, as I describe these, you'll all recognise all of them, but you'll usually find that 1 or 2 are predominant. If you're sitting next to somebody you know, you're not allowed to poke them and start laughing at them when I get to their one. First 2, put together because they're about as opposite as you can get, which means you often marry them. Hurry up or be perfect. Hurry up, they're what their names say. Hurry ups are quick, productive, get loads done, everything's in a rush, great with deadlines, but make mistakes because they're hurrying, leave everything to the last minute and something goes wrong, and are impatient. They're the ones who come late to meetings, then get impatient with you because you're not talking fast enough, and then dash away before the end because they've got another appointment. Be perfect, so about the opposite of that. Take it slowly, want to be accurate, want everything to be correct. Very good if you're going to have an operation. They will cut the right leg off. The hurry-ups are better in a war zone, of course, but otherwise you really want to be perfect, surgeon. But they're pedantic, they have to check everything, they won't share anything because they can't let you see anything less than perfect, you can't possibly see a draft. So generally would then drive you nuts, but they are well organised and careful and they usually do accurate stuff. So already you can see that there are some jobs, aren't there, where some of these are more likely to be than others. Like newspapers for hurry-ups, because if you don't get it out by the time of the deadline, and then they have to have lawyers who will be perfect in the background saying you can't print that. Another 2, again, opposites. Please people, be strong. Please people are very nice, warm, caring, empathic. The drawback with that is that they then get sort of paranoid about upsetting anybody, so they can't do anything. They'll actually let you make a mistake because they think you'll upset if they tell you you're about to make a mistake, and then they'll feel really hurt when you come back and moan at them. Be strong, so the strong silent type, great in a crisis, stay calm, also great for doing the nasty jobs. If it's in the job, they'll do it. Other people might think, I don't want to do that, it's boring, but they'll do it. Trouble is, they're so calm that they come across a bit like a robot, people can't relate to them. They just feel like, are you for real? We're being told they're getting rid of our agency and you're just carrying on doing your work. Why aren't you getting upset like the rest of us? But calm and we'll get on and do all the work. Then the final one of these, try hard. These are the ones who are very enthusiastic, interested in lots of things, I suspect, again, there's going to be quite a lot of this in your industry. Great for starting things off, maybe not so good for finishing them. Wonderful if they've got to be perfect working with them, who comes and finishes it all off for them. But otherwise, they'll end up working on 6 projects and none of them are getting finished, because there's always something more interesting that just came along and they're going to work on that and they'll come back to the other one later, if ever. So that's the 5 styles. Little summary. Yeah. Quick but impatient, accurate but pedantic, empathic but appeasing, calm but unfeeling, or enthusiastic but butterfly mind. Now, having said that, what I'm going to now do is show you how you can fit these together and also the strokes. And again, I just want to repeat the Hey Health warning, because the further I go into simplifying this, the more important it is you don't just stick a label on someone and think, well, why aren't they doing what the model said? But they will if they're really stressed. To do this, we've got 2 axes to start with. It's called AP3. It's a donkey bridge again, because it's active, passive, alone people, and there is another one coming up in a minute to make it cubed. But first of all, active, passive doesn't mean energetic. It just means, do you initiate action to solve problems and so on, or do you wait for it to come along to you? There's no good or bad about that. It's just the way we work. And the alone or with people is, do you prefer to be alone or with people? If we think about the personal styles, these are the preferences. So some people would like to talk functional adult, and that's it. And if they're not that well developed or they're very stressed, that's only it. If you try a different one on them, they won't respond well. And that applies the same to all of them. So what's quite important is, for a new relationship especially, you suss out the signs and you choose the right channel first. It gives you a much better chance of getting a good connection. So there's a functional adult one. There's a nurturing parent to, actually I've just realised there's a mistake on there. That's good. I'll check if everybody's awake. That should say nurturing parent to natural child. That top left. My apologies for that. The bottom one, though, is natural child to natural child. And then the other one is controlling parent to adapted child. Those are the only 4 channels that you really need. They're the ones that work. Any other combinations, like if you try and do a functional adult to a child of some kind, it misses. It just doesn't work. So it does make it a lot easier to think, am I going to use one of those at least to make sure that you might be on the right track? If we then add in the 3rd dimension, and I've included there a picture of a cube, because otherwise I end up standing here saying I want you to imagine a cube. The 3rd dimension does not go from the back to the front, because people aren't that simple. This is based on a lot of empirical work. So the 3rd dimension goes from the back corner on the alone side to the front corner on the people side. And that's because of the way these things tend to get combined. So hopefully you've got that bit, and I'll show you what it means. It becomes, we've got some little extra bits in, it's all right. It becomes acceleration and patience. So then if you look at it like this, just remember that that's meant to be in 3 dimensions, but I can't do that here. I can then put the working styles on. So Be Perfect goes with functional adult. Please People goes with nurturing parent to natural child. Try Hard goes with natural child. And Be Strong goes with controlling parent to adapted child. There are people who really would like you to just tell them what you want them to do, and they'll do it. There probably aren't many of them in your industry. And then the hurry up is like a floater out on its own, but it's there because it often is seen in people who've also got Try Hard, and it's least likely to appear in people who've got Be Perfect. Hence, that's why it's sort of out over there. And I'm going through this because you're going to have this afterwards if you want to look back at it for this afternoon. Stroking preferences, therefore, top right, talk to them about their performance. Stroke them about work. Whereas top left, talk to them as a person. Ask them how their daughter's doing in her exams before you talk about the work. Bottom left, if they're a try hard, you have to be playful. And they're the ones who, when you say, how's the hang gliding going? They say, oh, that was 3 weeks ago. I've taken up deep sea diving now. Or their projects are like that. Their projects are like play. If they're hurry up, then you stroke them for their productivity. So all they really want to hear is, didn't you get a lot done? And in such a short space of time. And then if they're be strong, over in the other corner, just be polite. Say good morning. If you go up and start saying, you know, how's your daughter or that, what's that got to do with you? And then the relationship styles. Again, you've only got 5 to think about here. Yeah? Do you consult, or do you act like a caring person? Do you really connect with them at a sort of childlike level? Are you going to control them, tell them what you want, or are you going to be concise? And you'll know a hurry up. They'll be rushing past you. If you don't say it quickly, they've gone before you finish telling them. So you have to do it quickly. Now, that's the piece about what's going on in the elephant. The next piece is about contracting. And I was really interested when Evan was talking about the key engineering contract and so on. Because for me, what matters is that there are 3 levels, and what often only gets paid attention to are 2 of them. Procedural, that's the nuts and bolts and, you know, what time, what deadlines, what payment, all the rest of it. Professional is, well, what are we going to do? Now, that gets quite interesting looking at your contracts anyway, doesn't it? Because, well, what are you going to do? It's sort of like you're going to create something if you're an agency. So how do you specify what that would be? But what's really important is the piece about what's going on at the psychological level, which is back to underneath in the iceberg. And often that never gets talked about. And what I mean by that is saying things like, well, if our relationship were going to go wrong, how might that happen? Not how will it, because then you hex it, but how might it happen that this would go wrong? What kinds of things might be a problem? And that would also tie back in to what's really important to you. What really matters to each side. And the piece that John was saying about, you know, what is it you're looking for? And that idea that you actually want different things, and can everybody get a win-win? They have an exercise on management courses where they tell 2 groups that they have to negotiate about a supply of oranges. And they don't tell them until afterwards that one wants the pith and one wants the juice. But it's a bit like that, isn't it? It's like, that's what we really need to talk about when we're doing our contract. And I'm thinking like the 1-page contract, I would suspect, rests an awful lot on bringing that to the surface so that you work on a way that is open and transparent and you share what really matters. Now, when you get on to having multi-party contracts, what you've got there is there are some contracts that are written down, and those are the solid lines, but there are implicit contracts between the parties, which are the dotted lines. So it actually gets much more complicated. It's not just 2 parties. It's like there's all these people. And then you add into that each of those might actually have several people involved. It's even more complex. And what you then have to think about is, how do you sort out the psychological distances? How do you avoid it being that marketing and the agency, the client marketing, and the agency are sort of colluding? They're close because they're all sort of in the business, and those nasty procurement people are messing us up. But of course what that means is the procurement then feel like they're out at the sharp end and they don't want to be helpful. Or back to the old agency, new agency, what do you do when the client and their old agency are close and the new agency feels like it's out on the sharp pointed end? How do you get to the point that all of the triangles in all the different relationships are equilateral? And to do that, you have to take the psychological level into account. So you have to be thinking relationships. Final piece I put in here, because the whole focus of this was on relationships, is about managing change. Because if you pick up, hopefully you'll pick up some ideas from today and want to make some changes, we need to think about, well, what happens? And change doesn't have to involve grieving. I make that point because lots of consultants use Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model of change, which is based on what happens when somebody close to you dies. And then they wonder why in organizations people typically don't like change. It's like, well, they wouldn't, would they, if you tell them the metaphor is it's a death. What I use is a model based on child development and the issues we have as we're growing up, which none of us ever resolve, even with the best parents in the world. And the idea that what happens is we then recycle and recycle, and each time we do, it's an opportunity for some more development for us as well. So if we figure out where we might be stuck, then as we hit that stage again, we have another opportunity to come to a different conclusion because we're in different circumstances. The environment has changed. So this is the cycle. What I will do is very quickly explain it on children because you all know what it's like to be a child, so it's an easy example. Being 0 to 6 months, babies are just supposed to be. If you get a message that they didn't want you, then you struggle with the right to be, and that will come up again every 13 or so years. Exploring, 6 months to 18 months, kids start exploring. If they don't let you do that, if you're a Chinese baby and you're totally wrapped up in cloth by the side of the paddy field so that you don't drown, you never get to do that stage. But equally, if you're here and you get kept in a playpen all the time, or you're not kept safe, so you crawl over and put your finger in the socket, that rather interferes with your development at that stage. Thinking, 1.5 to 3, kids learn to think for themselves. They're often actually better at thinking logically than the grown-ups. But if they get smacked round the head and told to be quiet, they grow up not able to think. When I say better, it's a bit like it's raining. So the grown-up says, it's raining, put your coat on. No. Typical answer from a child that age. Put your coat on because it's raining and you'll get a cold. Now, that's actually a lie. It's just not true. You don't get a cold from going out in the rain as a little kid. You like the rain. So the kid's actually got a better logic than the grown-up. 3 to 6, we work out our identity. What we actually do is decide who we're going to be. We forget it afterwards, unfortunately. It takes us a while, and we maybe have to go to therapy to find out what it was. But I decided to be Robin Hood. This is quite interesting. I got very offended when I mentioned the fairy story once, and some guy said to me, oh, so are you Maid Marian? And I'm like, of course I'm not bloody Maid Marian. I'm Robin. But I had forgotten it until I saw the exercise of thinking about it. But that might also be based on a relative. You know, the grown-ups tell you, you're just like your aunt or you're just like your grandfather. And we then start to be like that and forget that it was a metaphor. Then from when we're about 6 till we're 12, we learn the skills of how to be like it, mostly by copying what we see around us. So that's where we're at the mercy of our role models. And then we have a phase from about 12 or 13 through to 18, 19, if we pull the whole thing together. And then we start again at 19. And we keep on going round. And we know from empirical research that 13 is a significant number and 19 is. So if you divide your age by those and see what the remainder is, that will tell you where you might be. They might be the same, they might be different. What also happens is, it's like Russian dolls. You get spirals within spirals. So what we've identified is exactly the same cycle happens for any change, but it's like nested within wherever you are, and that's nested. So you join a new organisation, you start another one for that, and then they move your desk, and that's another one. Maybe that's only a little one when they move your desk, who knows? And that's why sometimes you feel in life that everything's going really well for you, because they've all happily coincided at an age where in your childhood everything went really well. Unfortunately, on other days, of course, it's like everything in my life is awful, because they've coincided in an age where things went wrong. Now, the useful thing about that is if you know that, you can think, I feel awful, this must be a really good development opportunity for me. I could do something different. Okay, so if I turn that into work, I produced this thing called the Competence Curve. What happens is what organisations are interested in. It's not how you feel about this, are they? They're interested in are you doing the work or not when you go through a change. So what happens at the change point is you stop working. You go immobilised because something's changed and you don't know quite what to do yet. Then you go into denial, you go back to doing what you were doing, and eventually you realise, or they tell you, we've promoted you, stop doing the basic work or whatever. Then you get frustrated because you think, I don't know, I'm not sure what to do. That's even if you ask for the promotion, of course, because then you start thinking, what the hell did they promote me? I didn't know I'd have to learn this much new stuff. And then you accept it, and then you're ready to start getting developed, applying it, and then you finish. Now, I haven't got any proper research on this, but my take over the years is that if somebody moves, say, to a management job from a non-management job, their cycle lasts about 2 or 3 years. So if you make a fairly significant change in your work, it's a couple of years at least before you feel, I've done that, what's next? And you should think, I've done that, what's next? That would be normal, healthy behaviour. Staying in the same thing for your whole life would not be. So I used to work in big companies where, these people have been there 35 years doing the same job, and it's like, oh my God, they're dead. But, so, a couple of years maybe. One of the problems you get, of course, is organisations have this bad habit of reorganising. So you just get through to the bit where you're frustrated and you're about to get onto the home straight of feeling good, and they reorganise you again. And then they say, I don't know why they're so resistant to change. So that's the final piece of the model. So what's under the surface? Strokes, secret of the universe. I always say, if you know about stroking, you can manipulate anybody. And of course, as you have a window on the world that is I'm okay, you're okay, you will do that respectfully, because why wouldn't you want it to be good? Then you've got your personal styles and the working styles, which fit together into thinking about how the whole relationship works. And then, not so much under the surface, but it is, the piece about the contracting that really matters is the bit that doesn't get talked about quite often. And then seeing change as an opportunity for growth rather than an occasion for grieving. And that's it, and I've no idea, how did we work out on the timing?
Wow. Right. You really pack it in there,
yeah,
Julie.
I did, didn't
so
I?
I think people will probably want to, go away and pick bits of this and sort of chew over it.
I'm here all day, so I'm open to questions over lunch as well.
But it's very interesting. Look, just in terms of the core thing, because you brought with your cube, you brought together the working styles, the personal styles, and the relationship styles. I'm just not quite clear what you do with that. So you've got the cube. You can place yourself into one of the types in each of those three categories.
Yep.
You can place your agency or your client in one of those three, the people you're working with.
Yes.
What do you actually do with that? So suppose you find you're not in one of the ones that fits. You just
You move. So that's my piece about this was also a challenge and not just an exploration.
You change the agency or you change yourself.
You change yourself.
But is that easy? I mean, if you are a hurry-up person, with a controlling parent style,
well,
I mean, how easy is it to change?
It's not that easy, but it's not that difficult if you really decide to. And this is about, when we were little kids, we did all of these, and then we've settled. We've only chosen a few. And it's like, well, you may have to dust some of them off again and get them out and practice them. But if the relationship's going to matter, and it clearly does matter, and it makes you more money, then you need to shift. And the relationship will be determined by the person who's got the most skill, or, to quote some of the previous speakers, who knows best how to adapt.
Right.
So
the key
you
thing is to look at
the
corners of the quadrant that work, which is what you're really telling us, which combinations fit.
Yes.
And to try and make sure that you're fitting all of those. Yeah. Okay. We had a question, which was, does Julie think poor agency-client relationships are closer to a controlling parent and adapted child, whereas a healthy relationship would be more adult-adult? But I don't think you are
That's a
thinking
good question, no.
But because you're
Yeah.
saying there are various ways in which it could work, rather than
Yeah.
there just being one. You don't have to find one.
No,
But
and
they
at the
tend to-
risk of stereotyping, I would have suspected that the best relationships have got a lot of natural child and nurturing parent. I was fascinated because I was watching the previous people talking to you and looking at how they were dressed, because that gives you some clues about what styles they are. And I was thinking, okay, so those two look like they're both please people. They were both like a nurturing parent, natural child way of behaving, which will be great because they'll feel comfortable with each other. And then there was another pair where I thought, okay, actually they look like they're both the try-hard, natural child, just looking at how they were dressed. And again, they'd think that's fine. Their problems would be when they convince other people in their organisations what they want to do. So if they don't have the skill to then come across differently with those other people, they'll lose it in the boundary, as it were.
So someone's asked how you change when you have to be authentic to what you believe and what you are.
Well, that's about what's being authentic. And if it's you wanting to get on better with people, how could you see that as not being authentic? It's like you wouldn't deliberately annoy someone and say that was being authentic, but you are deliberately annoying someone if you understand that your behaviour is hacking them off, basically. So why wouldn't you want to get on with people?
Well, as I say, I think people will want to look at that cube more carefully. I mean, if you take away one thing right now, which you don't need to look at the cube for, touch being very important. You know, we did a piece on Newsnight. I did it about 12 years ago with an HR guy who said touch at work is a very good thing. And he explained the duration of the OK touch and demonstrated it, and you know how you mustn't linger, but a touch. And I watched that piece and I made a concerted effort to touch more at work. And I think it has made a real difference, actually. I think people relate to you very differently if you patted them, or not on the bum, on the shoulder or something like that, you know.
And you see,
just touch, or touch their arm and said, hey, matey, how are you today?
Well, you were very convenient when I came up to speak to you this morning, because you had your back to me, so I could touch you on the arm, so you
and then we'd
turn,
immediately
and I got
touch.
to
You know, it's
you.
very, very interesting. I think that if you take away anything, touching your client, brilliant. Anyway, we have had Julie. Thank you very much indeed, Julie Hay. Thank you.